Hello, everyone, and welcome and thank you for joining us at the very first XR4C Talk and Play of 2023. My name is Tanisha Singleton, and I'm very, very excited to be your host and MC for this virtual event. I am part of the Games for Change XR team, and whether you're a novice or a seasoned creator in XR, or an organizer or educator in nuclear disarmament, or just an overall advocate for humanity and is inspired by how storytelling and the arts of all forms can be used for good, then you are in the right space. Now, I know you might be thinking right now, what is this XR4C you speak of? Well, let me be the one to tell you. XR for Change is an initiative within Games for Change with a very simple and strong mission: to be leaders in and facilitate how XR can drive social change. Now, whether that's virtual or augmented reality, XR4C is focused on addressing real-world challenges. How is this done? Can be more complicated sometimes than others, but we certainly do this by staying current with all of the latest advancements in technology to meaningfully use creative storytelling as persuasive prompts for engagement, all of course with the purpose of encouraging dialogue and starting to shift perspectives and mental models and behaviors for good. And I think we're all here because we know of at least one project in specific that has demonstrated this on top shelf levels, and that being On the Morning You Wake to the End of the World, the award-winning virtual reality documentary that captures the voices of the people who experience the real and imminent threat of nuclear weapons in Hawaii. And this, of course, is making very clear the fundamental injustice of a world where nuclear weapons exist. And this project is currently on display with a beautifully curated exhibition at Museum of the Moving Image in New York City. If you haven't already seen it, it is still open until February 12th. So please, you will not want to miss this. And today we have an outstanding collection of humans, advocates, organizers, and leaders lined up for you that you're going to be hearing from. Now, I'm going to be hanging out in the back, so please take advantage of the chat features here. You have a chat feature here where you can leave comments, and then there's also Q&A. So we have allotted some time towards the end of this hour, about the last 15 minutes or so. So you can definitely be sure to engage with us. Let us know what you're thinking. And if you have any questions for any of our panelists specifically, drop them in the Q&A, and I promise that we will get to you. So without further ado, I promise no one has logged in here to see or hear from me. So it is my pleasure to introduce to you the super amazing Michaela Ternasky-Holland, who will be serving as our moderator for this. Michaela, thank you for being here and taking some time out. Super excited to have you here. And let me hand it on over to you.
Wow, thank you so much, Tanisha. That was amazing. For everyone who might not know, Tanisha is our incredible digital content strategist in the background. I'm honored to have her work as a part of my team. I myself am the impact producer and creative strategist for On the Morning You Wake to the End of the World. When Games for Change reached out to me at the end of 2021, they posed a challenge to me around really building a digital and physical wraparound experience for the virtual reality documentary that they had executive produced for Princeton University Science and Global Security Program, alongside the incredible creators Atlas V and Archer's Mark, who are well known for their work on Notes on Blindness. And so bringing this experience to life was definitely a challenge in multiple ways, but one of the things that I was so excited to be able to do when I came into the Games for Change team was actually be able to work alongside incredible subject matter experts to help guide me, who knew nothing about nuclear weapons, as a policy front, knew nothing about nuclear weapons as a geopolitical issue, knew hardly anything about nuclear disarmament and the movement around nuclear abolition. And being able to work alongside these incredible subject matter experts, the G4C team decided to put together a program called Impact Fellowships. And so I am so excited to be joined by our incredible panelists today. We will first do an introduction, and then we will do a brief activity all together. So without further ado, I would like to first introduce Ray Acheson.
Hi, my name is Ray Acheson, and I'm speaking from the lands of the Lenape and Canarsie people in what is known as Brooklyn, New York, and I support land back to Indigenous nations. My pronouns are they, them. I'm director of Reaching Critical Will, which is the disarmament program of the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. And I'm also a steering group member of ICAN, the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, which won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2017 for our work to outlaw nuclear weapons. And I wrote a book about that work called Banning the Bomb, Smashing the Patriarchy, and then also a book that ties the work to eliminate nuclear weapons to other abolitionist movements called Abolishing State Violence. Thanks very much, Michaela and team.
Thank you, Ray. The next panelist I would like to have introduce themselves is Cynthia Lazaroff.
Thank you, Michaela. I'm really excited to be here today. I'm zooming in from Los Angeles on the ancestral lands of the Tongva. My pronouns are she, her. I'm an author and filmmaker and the founder of Women Transforming Our Nuclear Legacy and Nuclear Wake Up Call.Earth. And I've had the honor of being involved with On the Morning You Wake almost since the very beginning when I was interviewed for the film about my personal experience living through the Hawaii false alarm in 2018. And over the past year, I've had the joy and privilege of working as a fellow with Games for Change and these incredibly wonderful and inspiring people on the Impact Campaign team. So I'm really looking forward to our conversation today. Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, lovely Umayam.
Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. My name is Lovely Umayam. My pronouns are she, her. I am tuning in from Dublin, California, which is the ancestral lands of the Ohlone. I am a nuclear nonproliferation researcher. I've been doing this research for almost a decade now, have been able to do it from government, non-government capacities. And also I have founded the Bomb Shelter Policy and Arts Collective, which is this informal experimental space where I invite artists, activists, scientists, and other policy scholars to present nuclear narratives through different forms of media. And again, I've also been an impact fellow for On the Morning You Wake in the past year. So happy to be here.
Awesome. And for those of you who are tuning in, Games for Change, as well as I, am based in New York City, which is the ancestral homes of the Canarsie and Lenape people. My pronouns are she, her. And a visual description of me, I have black hair and I'm wearing a turtleneck with a cream turtleneck and a greenish top. And I have brown eyes. Before we jump into our panel discussion, I think it's so important to acknowledge that the work that's constantly being done in the peacemaking space, nuclear weapons threat is just one part of this larger coalition of people and activists working to end violence all around the world. And I think definitely coming into the new year, we've seen a huge uprising of violence specific to the mass shootings in the Asian American communities, as well as the other violence that constantly happens around the world. So before we jump into the panel discussion, the panelists, as well as myself, felt it might be appropriate for us to just take a moment of silence to acknowledge the work that's being done and the hurt that's also being inflicted. Thank you. Now, I would like to invite my panelists to come back to the quote-unquote Zoom stage so we can begin our discussion. All right. So yesterday we had our tech check, and one of the first things I said when I saw everybody come into the Zoom room was, it makes me so happy to see these people's faces. It's been a year of collaboration. It's been a year of discussion. There have been many moments throughout this Impact Fellowship where we've had to have really difficult conversations about what's happening in the world. One moment in particular I remembered was the invasion of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and bringing that to the world and reawakening people's awareness around nuclear weapons threat. I want to open the floor first to Lovely. Lovely, tell me a little bit about the Impact Fellowship for you and what it was like to work with us, and maybe if you have like a memory that sticks out for you through this year-long process.
Sure thing. Thank you again for having me. This Impact Fellowship has, I like the word that you used, reawakening in some ways. It's been difficult to conduct nuclear policy work during COVID, just because the pandemic was, another sort of urgent and in some ways more intimate threat to our lives as peoples. And it was certainly a time for me where it really challenged me to think about my priorities and to redefine what security is, what protection is for me. And it's understandable that nuclear issues aren't in the forefront of people's minds. But as you mentioned, with the invasion of Ukraine, threats, nuclear threats sort of resurfacing, talks about nuclear modernization, it's very clear that we still live under the shadow of nuclear weapons. And I think one of my favorite memories of working on this is just all of our conversations about not only the film, but how to steward or guide people, people's experiences in viewing the film, and making sure that we meet them where they're at, making sure that we give them a safe place to learn about nuclear weapons without forgetting the fact that a lot of people are in pain in their own sort of ways, personal ways, in local community level ways, and how do we use this creative format as a way to bridge these issues together. A lot of that was really just from our Zoom conversations about developing the different sort of spaces, may it be Sundance or other sort of film festivals. Like, how do we actually bring On the Morning You Awake to different audiences? So it's just been a really amazing year, and I really look forward to seeing more positive responses of this film 2023 and beyond.
Thank you. Cynthia, do you have anything to add to that question? Obviously your own spin, your own flavor.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. And Lovely's words also. It's been such an amazing year. It's been, for me, such a gift and blessing to be a part of this team. It's been such a creative, collaborative process. I've never quite done anything like this before in this way. And I think it's probably generational since I'm the oldest of the bunch. But we've all been sharing and learning and challenging each other in all kinds of really supportive ways, and really going deep together. I think has been really exciting for me on what really are the important messages and takeaways we would like to offer people who have this experience, and how can we most effectively communicate them, as Lovely said, to people in all kinds of different settings, audiences in all different parts of the world from very different backgrounds. From high schoolers in Iowa who have never, thought about nuclear weapons before, to people who are involved every day thinking about nuclear weapons and working on abolition, to government people, to filmmakers, whoever it's been. But I've really appreciated the care that everybody has brought to this process in really thinking about how to create a safe space, as Lovely said, for people going through the experience. That's just been so, I think, important for everybody going through it. And I think one of the most memorable times for me are just have been the moments where I've actually been around where people are going through the experience at an installation. And I see them, with the VR headsets, but I see tears and I see them wiping tears, or I see them, come up afterwards and just talk about how much they're moved and how they want to do something and how they never knew and how they never understood it, and it never felt this way to them before. So it's been such a rich experience, very thoughtful, very intentional. And I've just appreciated the way we've all been able to work together and everything that you've all taught me. So I'll carry it forward, and I'm so grateful.
Thank you, Cynthia. Thank you, Cynthia. Ray?
Yes, I don't want to repeat anything that Cynthia and Lovely just said, but I think one thing to really emphasize is the diversity of the work that we've been doing. So, we started out developing curriculum for high school students, and then we were developing aftercare surveys for people at film festivals. And then we were working to bring this experience into the United Nations in Vienna and then New York and show it to diplomats and policymakers. So there's been so many different elements to this project over the past year. And I think that's been really interesting and inspiring and engaging, figuring out how to make this appealing to the general public and then to people that work on nuclear weapons pretty much full time. And so I think, for me, I'm new to VR and this kind of technology. I'm a little bit of a Luddite actually sometimes. And so I think watching the film for the first time was only the second time I'd ever been in a headset. And so I found it to be incredibly profound and a really interesting way to draw attention to the intimacy of nuclear violence, to make it less abstract and ground people in the reality of this is what can happen in your daily life. And so even as someone that's worked to abolish nuclear weapons for many, many years, I really found it to be a unique tool that offers a lot to organizers and activists to engage the general public, as well as, talk to folks that have been working on this issue for a long time. I think one thing that I also learned in this process is I came in feeling that VR, and I still do feel that VR is kind of an inaccessible technology, right? You have to have a headset, you kind of have to have some knowledge of tech in order to set up your headset. And so I've been wary about hyping something that's only available to a few people or that seems kind of elitist in that sense. And I'm wary of the metaverse in general as potentially an escape for a privileged few from the reality of the world that we live in. But I also have learned really about the relevance of this kind of immersive storytelling for how you can bring people to be inspired to act in the world that we do live in. And so that's why I think the film festivals, the museum exhibits, these opportunities for folks to come in and engage in an open space in an open way with this technology and this story is really, really important.
Thank you, Ray. Yeah, one thing, this idea of a tool, right? Like I agree, the VR documentary, it's an incredible experience. And it's just that, it's a tool. And like, depending on how we sharpen that tool or how we dole out that tool or how we change that tool, like it can be so many different things. And I think that was the beauty of collaborating with you all as subject matter experts. It was like, how do we create like these flexible materials that can be relevant to a policymaker, similar to what I think Cynthia was saying, how it can be relevant to somebody who's been working in nuclear abolition, all the way down to a high school student who's never been exposed to VR. And I really feel like the care of that humanity, like the care of quality over quantity, like we weren't as interested, I feel like, as a team together when we came into this agreement around this experience in saying we need to get to 1 million people. We were more interested in the quality of the experience that each person had. And I really think that like that kind of melded through the process of the way, and I don't mean to get mushy gushy here, but like of the way we treated each other in spaces, of the way that we communicated with each other in spaces, and then the way that we decided that that was how people should be communicated with about nuclear weapons threat, right? Like the same care of like me who didn't know anything being kind of educated by you all is sort of the same voice I took on when we were crafting the surveys all together, and the same voice that you all helped the project kind of become into. So we keep talking about these onboarding and aftercare surveys. That was one of the biggest things we tackled first, I feel like, or one of the biggest things we approached first together as a team. So tell me a little bit about, Ray touched on this gently, but working in VR, and then what are we going to do with VR, and like how we sort of as a team and how you as an individual sort of wrapped your mind around like how to create those wraparound materials, or how to present these wraparound materials to people, or how to talk about things in the wraparound materials. And I'll hand the mic to Lovely.
Sure. I actually want to follow Ray's point. VR, especially in the nuclear policy field, we're always sort of lamenting that it's so hard to make nuclear issues relevant, because it's been so long since someone's seen a nuclear mushroom cloud. Nowadays, we just experience it in fictional movies and what have you, and people are forgetting. And so I think as a nuclear policy expert going into this, there was certainly a level of excitement of, oh, look at this new media that could make these issues more intimate. But I was also a little bit reluctant, because it is an extremely violent issue to kind of plop someone in and put on a headset. And to your point about aftercare and the other wraparound materials, I mean, I think part of what we did as a group very effectively is carve out spaces, like sometimes literally space, for people to take out the headset, kind of reflect, may that be by themselves or with other folks that they may be next to, watching the film, in order to just allow the emotions to course through them, maybe be able to talk about those feelings. And honestly, I haven't really seen a lot of media that's able to instill that, as you say, Michaela, level of care. And I guess I'll also mention now that the film itself, even though it's about nuclear issues, it's about this very traumatic event for people to receive sort of a false, alarm, sort of, potential missile attack. That the film itself doesn't censor the mushroom cloud. It centers the people who experienced it, how they were able to reflect on the meaning of security, the meaning of home for them, what it means to, at that moment, think about losing it, but also coming away from that experience, realizing that there's also love, there's also community. And so the film, the content of the film itself, even though it's about nuclear issues, it felt very human, and it's not about the violence, but also the people, and it's also about resilience, it's also about survival. So I think hand in hand, the content of On the Morning You Wake, plus the work that we did as an impact team, it felt like a very cohesive experience that held people as they learned about nuclear weapons.
No, I think that's really well said. And for anyone who's in the audience who might not know, On the Morning You Wake to the End of the World is a 3-part documentary about the Hawaii false ballistic missile alert that happened, where everyone in Hawaii, such as Cynthia at the time, received a text message that there was an incoming alert, and the unknowns that followed after that. And so I think what would be a good next step in this panel would be, maybe Cynthia, do you want to tell us a little bit about your firsthand experience with the false missile alert, and how you have been reflecting on that moment and the significance of how you center it as a first person experience when you're talking to people or when you're talking about the project?
Sure. Thank you, Michaela. We've all had those experiences in life where something happens and your life changes forever and it's never the same again. And going through the experience of the Hawaii false alarm was that moment for me. And as I look back now, it's been 5 years. We've just gone through the 5th anniversary. Still, the moment that's kind of the gut punch moment, I would say, the moment that still gets me, the moment that everything changed for me was the moment that I was racing to a cave for shelter. And I called my daughter to say goodbye for what I thought might be the last time. And when she finally picked up the phone, I said, Mackenzie, I don't know if you know, but we've all gotten this message on our cell phones that we're going to be hit by a nuclear missile. And I just want you to know I love you. And she said, Mom, I love you too. And at that moment, time stopped for me. I was frozen. I couldn't move. I didn't want to let her go because I didn't know if I'd ever see her again. And then my mind began to go and think about, wait a second, what if this isn't one nuclear missile? What if this is many nuclear missiles from Russia coming to us and many from us going back to them? What if this is one of those accidental nuclear wars that I'd just been interviewing dozens of top experts about in the US and Russia that they were also concerned about? What if this is the beginning of the end of life as we know it, of everything and everyone we know and love? And then I heard, Mom, go. So that's the moment that still gets me, as I said. And it took our government 38 minutes to get the word out to us that it was a false alarm. And even with everything I knew up to that point about nuclear weapons and nuclear war was unimaginable to me until I went through those 38 minutes. And now this experience, up to this day, 5 years later, lives inside of me as a mother, as a human being, and it's never going to go away until we eliminate nuclear weapons. As I walked away from the cave that morning, the first feeling I had was, my God, I'm still here. We're all still here. I was pinching my cheeks. I felt like my life had been returned to me. And then I had this thought, this is a wake-up call. This is a gift. I want everybody to know what this is like so that we can end nuclear weapons before they end us, and that no one ever needs to go through this. I don't want anyone to ever live through this kind of experience again. And then, I thought, again, that I want to share this. And so when On the Morning You Wake came along, it was like an answer to a prayer for me, really, because unlike anything that I've seen out there about the false alarm, whether it's articles or other documentaries, it gives people the chance to step into our shoes and experience what it's like to spend 38 minutes thinking that the world might be coming to end and that there's a nuclear missile coming at any moment. And it gives people the chance to, face the impossible decisions and choices and questions that we were living through. Where do you go? Where are your loved ones? Can you get to them? How many minutes do you have? What do you take with you? Who do you call to say goodbye? And when you go in through that experience, when you think about who would I call to say goodbye, you live the unimaginable. And it makes this personal and it makes it real. And it wakes you up to what the stakes are, that our lives are at stake and that a nuclear war would mean the end of everything. And so in this way, I think it really can inspire people to wake up and make a difference. And that's why I'm so grateful that this is out there. And this is why it's an answer to a prayer for me. So this is what I reflect on in this moment, that there's gratitude that there's something like this out there to give people the chance to experience this and wake up and make a difference.
Thank you, Cynthia. Yeah, and what I recall too is you had actually been a very adamant nuclear weapons activist through the Cold War, and then had kind of left that issue and topic behind, thinking that, climate change was more relevant for you at that moment. And then when this experience happened to you, it actually brought you back to being like, I actually want to speak out against nuclear weapons again as my main focus. Is that correct? I just want to make sure I'm saying that.
I was sort of on my way there, making this film, being awakened, but when this happened, everything changed. I knew I couldn't go back to what I was doing, that I had to just focus on this, because it felt like if this happened, no other issues would be around. And so I felt like I needed to try to work on this one again. And it was I couldn't believe that we were back, in this place where we had to, it never did go away. And Ray, I know, knows that. But for someone like me, when the Cold War came to an end after spending so much time on it, it was like, oh, thank God, now I can go work on what I love, which is the ocean and coral reefs and preventing, trying to work on addressing climate change. And then it was like, nope, you've got to go back to this. So, but it's been galvanizing, and it's been, and this project, I keep saying it's been a teaching, but I've really grown with this project, even in my own capacity to convey information about this experience, and to now have this tool to share with people.
Yeah.
There's really nothing like it.
Yeah, and again, I think this tool we keep talking about wouldn't be the tool it is without y'all's subject matter expertise. And there's no one else that I can think of besides the three of you. I'm sure there's so many people in the world, but like just the perfect, just having like almost like a perfect balance. And so Cynthia, with your background, as a first kind of person survivor, we would almost call you, through this incident, and your previous background with Russian-US relationships. And then of course, I want to spotlight Ray, who as a fellow has been so integral to helping us understand the geopolitical impacts that nuclear weapons has, not just, again, like on issues that we think of like traditional like warfare, but also like around racism and LGBTQIA rights, and how all these things are interconnected. And Ray, I have a very distinct memory of us sitting with a Google sheet, humble beginnings, just saying, what are things people are interested in, and what organizations working against nuclear weapons that should we connect them to, right? And building those logic jumps with you, and not knowing half these organizations, and also not knowing half of these United Nations events that happen around disarmament. So I just want to highlight you and tell us and ask you to tell us a little bit more about the tangible impact, like you've seen pieces around like storytelling, but also policy, and how they've affected the nuclear disarmament community in the last few years.
Absolutely. Yes, I remember those early spreadsheets, and how magically they got turned into surveys that people could then get hooked up with organizations. And I have no concept of how that happened, but glad to do the data entry for it. And it's been really remarkable, actually, in the UN and other spaces where these people who can make decisions operate, how much they actually do want to engage with the film. And, there's a little bit of hesitancy and skepticism, so you have to push a few of them to do it, and then they all get their friends to do it. And I think for a lot of them, for the ones that are already keenly working on these issues, it's a reminder of the human element of why they do what they do, and why they need to be bold in what they do, why there is no room for compromise when it comes to nuclear weapons. And then for diplomats or policymakers who maybe represent countries that say don't support the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, or that even possess nuclear weapons, it's interesting to watch them sort of be quiet after seeing the film, and not exactly knowing how it is impacting their thinking, but being very hopeful that they're going away with a new reflection, or body of information to think about in their work. And I think also, the VR experience, in addition to being a very personal account of the issues at hand, also gives a very clear picture that can help us challenge some of the assumptions that are made about nuclear security, nuclear safety. Daniel Ellsberg's voice is featured in the experience, and his book, The Doomsday Machine, really illuminated the fragility of the nuclear system, the command and control structures. And so I think these are all really important aspects for policymakers to think of. But I also think another element of this experience that's quite profound, in particular for organizers and activists that are working for nuclear abolition, is that it's On the Morning You Wake is really a tool to help us connect nuclear weapons to these other issues of structural violence that you were talking about, Michaela. So whether folks are interested in working on climate change or police brutality or poverty or rising fascism, it's easy for everyone to see nuclear weapons as abstract and not related, and sort of an issue that we don't need to deal with because we have these more pressing concerns. And I think Lovely was saying that as well earlier. But this experience, especially as it's anchored by Jamaica Osorio's amazing poem, that talks about militarism, that talks about imperialism, that talks about the racism of nuclear weapons. It really helps to show how nuclear weapons are part of all these other challenges, how they harm people every single day, even without being detonated, how they're part of the systems that oppress and control the international sphere through militarism and colonialism and through threat making and warmongering, but also how they impact people's lives through the waste of billions of dollars that are spent on nuclear weapons every year, and the ways that their production and their testing has impacted mostly indigenous nations and people of color around the world. So I think there's a lot packed into this experience that uses that false alert in Hawaii as its starting point, but then tells such a bigger story about nuclear weapons. And I think one of the key things for all of us using this film has been that we don't want people to come away feeling helpless, right? We don't want them to think, oh gosh, nuclear weapons are an insurmountable obstacle in our world. Instead, we're asking people to consider how they can help change the story.
100%. And I think a huge part of what I've learned about communicating issues to people, be it nuclear weapons that are another issue, is that sometimes the data and the analytics is not the way to people's actual understanding. It might be a way to their logic brain, but when you talk about asking someone to make an emotional decision that goes against what they've been trained into their whole lives to believe about security, about safety, or when you're asking somebody to really think about what is important to them, usually when you're breaking down belief systems of what is important to them, right? It's X is important, Y is important. But when you're actually asking them, like, what's really important to you? We don't do that usually through the logical brain of like data and analytics. We do that through the creative sense of humanity and the intimacy of humanity. And I think rounding out our amazing trio is Lovely, who, you have this amazing background in nuclear policy, but you have also departed from a more traditional career on the Hill, as we call it, Washington, to start your own arts collective and looking at the creative inspiration that nuclear weapons can kind of have in creating art. So please tell us a little bit about this collective. Please tell us a little bit about how you think art connects to human creativity and human understanding around these issues.
Sure thing. So as I mentioned, the collective is called the Bomb Shelter Policy and Arts Collective. And it's something that I created almost 10 years ago when I was still starting out in a nuclear policy field as a graduate student. I may have mentioned earlier that my specific expertise is nuclear nonproliferation, which is the study of how policies and technical work prevent the spread of nuclear weapons. And back then, when I was a student, I was exposed to a very traditional approach to the issues, and mostly in the perspective of government, in this case, the US government, as well as scientists. And anything beyond that was rarely covered. And so Bomb Shelter was really inspired by a friend and a fellow classmate of mine at that time. So shout out to Sayaka Shingu. And a certain radioactive monster living off the coast of Japan, which is Godzilla. And at that time, I knew that everyone knows Godzilla, right? The iconic pop culture monster. But it was Sayaka who really encouraged me to watch the 1954 version, the Japanese version. And that's when I realized that Godzilla as a story is about nuclear testing, awakening this monster that ended up terrorizing Japan, which is actually in reference to a fallout from US nuclear testing that harmed Japanese fishermen back in 1954. Anyway, I mentioned all of this as a way to, I guess, say or two things. I think that, art and culture are important conduits to nuclear issues, may it be intentionally or subconsciously. And second, the nuclear field is multivalent with so many different casts of characters, so many different kinds of stories. And seeing it from a singular lens of the government or the military or scientists is actually quite limiting and in some ways undemocratic. As nuclear scholars or policy practitioners, it's easy to data dump, as Michaela, you mentioned, like really centering logic brain. But for these issues to connect, right, like you really have to use creativity and emotional intellect. And that's where you start challenging these traditional notions of security. Do we really need these weapons? You really can't avoid that discussion or conversation if you actually apply emotional intelligence to these issues. But in any case, 10 years later, working in this field in different ways, bomb shelter is something that has grown with me, that continues to evolve with me. And I think it's, in some ways, it's become this champion for multidisciplinary, multimedia work in the nuclear field. And going back to On the Morning You Wake, I just feel incredibly honored to be asked to be an impact fellow, because this is really a fantastic case study of how VR is now a tool for nuclear issues.
Yes, thank you all. We only have a few more minutes before we need to open it up for Q&A. And I just want to say, for any of the XR creators out there, or for any of the impact focused kind of ideas people out there, maybe you don't have any interest in nuclear weapons threat, and maybe you're not connected to this issue, but maybe you're connected to a different issue. I think everything and anything we're saying can apply to your issue. I think it's like centering a story of an intense issue that you are approaching, or that you are trying to distill into something that feels more human and intimate. A lot of that gets put into play when you play with creativity and you play with artistic points of view, or you even play with real world people's stories and collaborating with those people to say, how would you like your story to be presented? How would you like your story to be told? And really thinking that sky is the limit, because that was really the impetus of On the Morning You Wake to the End of the World. Princeton University approached Games for Change and said, we think we can do a project that will be like the next day after tomorrow, ideally, that will awaken the public to this issue. And instead of it being a film like Day After Tomorrow, we would like it to potentially be a VR experience. So I think it's important to know that whether you are someone who came here because of the issue or someone who came here because of the creativity, that On the Morning You Wake and these amazing impact fellows and the work we've been doing for the last year, we're actually looking to publish a best practices guideline in the coming few months. So please stay on a lookout for that. Before I open it up for questions, I just want to ask my amazing panelists one quick question. And that is, what's one thing people should know about nuclear weapons and or abolition? It can connect to both of those ideas, right? So I think a lot of misnomers about this issue are out there, and I want to give you all an opportunity to clear the slate, but also like send somebody a call to action of like how they should get involved or what they should know on nuclear weapons disarmament. Okay, I'm going to start first with Ray.
Start with the person who cannot answer this question quickly. I think the one thing I want people to know is that it is absolutely possible to abolish nuclear weapons. This is not pie in the sky. We have a treaty that already outlaws nuclear weapons, so they are illegal under international law. So we have that tool. And from a technical standpoint, we know how to dismantle nuclear weapons. The US and Russia, they've both been doing that for many years since the end of the Cold War. There's new kinds of verification processes being developed all the time. There's no technical barriers to eliminating nuclear weapons. Disarmament is not a mystery. But nuclear weapons exist, and this sounds a little flippant, but nuclear weapons exist because we allow them to exist. Because we allow in our imaginations this idea that there is some kind of necessary evil that maintains stability in the world. And this is a myth that we have been fed, and we've been fed it by the military industrial complex. We've been fed it by the think tanks and the academics and the politicians. and the military contractors that fund all this work to generate support for nuclear weapons. And it is propaganda. And so we need tools like this that can open our own minds, unlock our own minds and imaginations about what is possible. And then we need to take action to achieve that. And there are lots of different ways to get involved in ICANN's work in terms of divesting your money from nuclear weapons production, or getting your city to support the treaty and call on the government to abolish nuclear weapons. There's lots and lots of tools that we can engage. If you go to ICANN's website, icanw.org, you can figure out how to plug in directly to the work that we're doing right now.
Thank you, Ray. Cynthia.
Well, I want to say that, if it's not already obvious from what I've said, that nuclear weapons are personal, that they're personal for me, for you, for everybody, that a nuclear war would be the end of everything we know and love. And that I just invite everybody to look around, and we're still here. You know, we still have time. We can still get this right. We can still leave a world without nuclear weapons to our children and grandchildren. We all have agency. It's not up to the governments. That's a myth. It's another myth. That it's, if nuclear weapons can destroy all of us, we all have a stake and a role to play in eliminating them. We all have agency. We can all make a difference. We can all take action to change the nuclear story and support the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, which Ray talked about, is the greatest, no pun intended, ray of light and hope for me in this work. It is what keeps me going in moments of despair, in moments of worry and despair. It's the treaty. So we can all do this.
Thank you. And finally, Lovely.
Sure. Oh my gosh, it's so hard to follow that. But I assume this is a non sort of nuclear expert audience. So maybe one important thing that is that you can be mindful of is the way that you imagine a nuclear weapon. Like when you try to see it in your mind's eye, what does it look like? Presumably you're probably imagining a missile in a silo somewhere in the middle of nowhere, or in a waiting to be launched in a submarine or what have you. But it's a very static image. But to Ray's point, a lot of the, non-nuclear experts, non-nuclear activists, sort of forget that the maintenance component of it, how all of these systems are created in the first place, and the human, environmental, and the financial impact. I mention this because I've just been reading about how the United States is moving forward to modernize its nuclear arsenal. And, doing so can cost over $3 billion. In particular, what I'm thinking of is replacing the ICBMs, or intercontinental ballistic missiles, that we currently have. And that in and of itself is already $3 billion, or more than $3 billion, and thinking about its impact on ecologies and frontline communities. So I just want to share that to underscore Ray and Cynthia's point that nuclear weapons touch a lot of aspects in our lives, even though, the image that you see in your mind's eye is just sitting somewhere that isn't touching you. It actually is. And I think that this film is a great way to sort of share that with the broader public.
Thank you, Lovely. All right, I see Tanisha's back, and that means that Michaela needs to wrap up this panel discussion. So I just want to give our amazing panelists a round of applause. Thank you so much. It was just this time last year, I was sending you all fellowship packets being like, here's what we're thinking of doing. You want to hang out with me and join up? And it was great. It was such an amazing year, and it was such an amazing time to spend with you all. So thank you. And this is really sort of the capstone to that for everyone out there. Like, this is really the kind of moment we get to celebrate the Impact Fellowship, and the moment we get to transition into a new space for the Impact campaign for On the Morning You Wake. And that being said, I'm going to pass the mic to Tanisha for Q&As.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you all so much. And this has been amazing. And I'm bummed we only, this audience only has you all for the next 10 minutes or so, but we do have some really great questions and important questions that have entered into the chat. So I think one of the first ones too, this kind of relates back to, Michaela, what you teased up a little bit in terms of the white paper report and more like an impact report, right? In terms of some of the analysis that we've been doing, because this has been, like you said, 1 year full circle capstone experience of creating this completely worldwide social impact campaign. And so this question is, what direct engagement have you seen from the experience? And do you think that engagement is more prevalent in VR rather than traditional methods? So speaking a little bit to the A/B testing and 2D versions of just how are we consuming the product? Because lovely, this goes back to some of the awesome things you've echoed that just resonate with me too personally. My PhD's in media psychology, so that whole intersection of media consumption and human behavior and how our emotions can be influenced by that. Absolutely, like double, triple down, because oftentimes the way that our education system here is set up, like we're framed to remember pop culture more than history because of the gatekeeping of information. So when we are presented with stories like this, things can hit different if it's, 2D static or versus immersive. So maybe Michaela, do you want to speak a little bit to what folks can expect with this impact report and white paper report coming up, and any experiences you all might have as well that you want to jump in terms of direct engagement?
Yeah, so I'll briefly answer that. One of the best practices guidelines that we're putting together will include a whole research process we've been doing the last few months around testing the effects of VR as a medium for impact and engagement and learning versus a more traditional 2D version of the experience. And so really the difference is just the media. So to also offer an answer to the other question is, the VR experience is available publicly for anyone who has a Quest 2 headset. It's fully free, available to download. If you don't have a headset, there is a 2D version film. I believe you have to pay for it, and you might have to be in the UK. But if you are interested in getting in touch with us, if you have an organization, a classroom, a group of activists that you think should see On the Morning You Wake, we'll work with you one-on-one as a partner to figure out the best methodology and medium, whether that's the VR headset version or the 2D version. And that was one of the important parts of the creators of On the Morning You Wake wanting to make it more accessible and more widely known, was to create both the VR version and the 2D traditional documentary version of the experience. Direct engagement wise, I'm going to open the floor up to our amazing panelists of like what you all have seen as far as direct engagement, or what you all have heard from folks.
Yeah, and if there's anything, Ray or Cynthia, lovely, like from attending one of our global activations, being in Vienna, any feedback that you might have gotten from a participant after a talk or after having experienced the project, either the first chapter. I know oftentimes I've heard from Michaela and our team, after they see the first chapter, they're like, no, keep it rolling. Like they want to see chapter 2 and 3 now because they just want to continue on. But yeah, are there any kind of standout remarks or moments, Cynthia, that kind of strike you in terms of engagement?
There are a couple that really come to mind. One was there was a man who is an investment advisor, and he saw it in Vienna, and he came up to you afterwards sobbing, and he just said, I was imagining, my going through this with my family and my children, and it really hit home for him. And he said that he wanted to share this experience with people that he advises on investment and stockbrokers and people to encourage them to divest from nuclear weapons. So that was one really inspiring moment for me. And I know that, we've been in touch since then and in the conversation. So I know he's really interested in continuing to stay connected to this project and do things like that. Yeah. There's a young activist also who comes to mind, who is from Norway. Her name is Tuva. I'm sure Ray and others here know Tuva. She really was moved by it. And my experience with her was that she kept wanting to at least have me come and sit with people who she wanted to get connected to the project and have the experience and encourage them to participate in it. And every time that, and she would ask me to share little bits of my story, and she would cry And it was very moving to her and very important for her to in her work use this as a tool to engage her community and to get them inspired and to encourage to bring it out to more people. So those are two specific examples that come to mind for me when you ask that question. I don't have a quantitative description, but those are two that really, and many other people who said they wanted to do something. I guess one more, a young woman in the Midwest in Iowa, a high schooler who didn't know anything about nuclear weapons. And she was most inspired by the moment in the film where there's a Hibakusha, a survivor of Hiroshima, who goes through the Hawaii false alarm. And it's very, very moving. And she didn't know what a Hibakusha was. She didn't know anything. And she came up to Immersive and she said, I want to learn more about the Hibakusha. I want to do something about this. And I don't know what she's done since then, but she was so moved. And that was the direction. She wanted to learn more as a way to think about what she wanted to do. So.
Lovely, man. Yeah, I remember hearing as well from someone that reached out that wanting to see the film as well, that kind of like you were sharing, Cynthia, about your experience, like living through this gentleman was telling me that his baby was just born, like they were in the labor room, right, and received this and had that same, like, well, that complete emptiness of just doubt. What? So definitely, I think we can say, like, we're all in the people business. I like to say that all the time, regardless of if we're storytellers, we're craftsmanships, we're selling anything, regardless of what it is and what we're building, we're in the people business. And so understanding the importance of first person perspectives in our own personal narratives is crucial for any and everything that we do. I know we only have a few minutes left, but I do want to ask one more quick question before I start to wrap it up. Michaela, this one might be more suited for you, but certainly anyone that might have a quick response, feel free to jump in. But someone in the audience is curious about, when this project was being created, was there a specific audience in mind, like the American government, skeptics, underrepresented communities? If there was anyone specific that as a target audience or something else that the creative industry might be able to do to kind of piggyback off of this and do something more impactful?
Yeah. So the experience was made by Arches Mark and Atlas V, and I wasn't there through the creative process of the virtual reality documentary itself, but I do know that the words like the next day after tomorrow, like the next like documentary that's going to create a movement and awareness around this issue that, you know, has been dormant before. This was, of course, like before 2022. And so I think the goal of the creation of the actual piece was really a universal piece of humanity that everyone could share a piece of. And so it wasn't meant to be targeted towards experts. It wasn't meant to be targeted towards high schoolers. And very similar to what Ray was saying earlier, like each person has their own reaction and experience with it. And what we've done as an impact team is build these very flexible digital-based wraparound materials that can be localized into different languages, that can be changed and adjusted, whether they're a high school student in Iowa, a high school student in Norway, or a policymaker in Denmark, or a policymaker in Africa. And they've been adjusted and readjusted multiple times. They've been adjusted for specific screenings at the UN. They've been adjusted for screenings at the Nobel Peace Center. And so this is the work we've been doing as a team. And so I think when we think about the audience for that experience, not just the VR experience, but the impact experience, we really try to make it feel human and connective to the people we are approaching, not just one large kind of like umbrella idea of what impact would be. And what would be important to them. And that's also goes deeper into the logic jumping we discussed, where like we put together, like, what are you interested in? And here's the organization you should get connected to, and those types of questions. I think when it comes to the creative industries and the film industries, I think for me, the biggest issues I always have is around inequitable storytelling. So like when people's stories are not being reciprocated with the same amount of exposure or the same amount of financial gain that the creators have, is really intense. And the types of people who make the stories versus the types of people who actually are featured in the stories, when they don't look the same and they don't sound the same, that's a huge issue I have. And I think what I want to see is a more equitable experience for everybody involved in creative art making and in documentary filmmaking and in game making. And that's one of the big things we stand for at Games for Change, but it's also I think one of the big things that we strive to do at XR for Change for this new fledgling industry called XR. One of my favorite memories, and I will wrap up this, I promise, is when we actually brought the experience not to Vienna, not to the United Nations, not to Nobel Peace Center, but actually when we brought the experience back to Hawaii to honor the people who had been involved in the project themselves. And we actually set up a small experience for folks as a really beautiful art gallery that was Indigenous owned in Oahu, where we invited them and their friends and their family and any local community members to come and see the experience. And it was so impactful for me because people were telling me how surreal it was to relive their experience, but also people were starting to talk about that day again. Hey, where were you, or what were you doing? And like, that is only unique to Hawaii. Like, I couldn't take this experience anywhere else in the world and have that experience that I got to witness. And so that is, to me, a part of that equitable storytelling. It's not just in the creation of the experience, but how you distribute and mobilize the experience. Taking the time and energy and finances to go back to Hawaii and do that was a very key part of our impact campaign.
No doubt. I mean, I want us to keep going and talking about more of the equitable part of this, and making sure that diverse voices and those that are represented in communities are like a part of this for sure. So I know we could keep going, but I know we're at the hour. I want to thank everyone for coming. If you want to revisit any of this information that we've talked about, I know there was a lot of high level good stuff in here that you may want to revisit. The recording of this is going to be made available on the Games for Change YouTube channel under the On the Morning You Wake YouTube playlist. And if you are not already, stay connected with everything On the Morning You Wake on social media. It's at Morning You Wake on Twitter and Instagram. Also in the chat right now, you will have all of the contact information and website ways to contact everyone that you heard from today. So from Michaela, Lovely, Ray, Cynthia, thank you so much for your time, your space, your transparency, and sharing your experiences and your knowledge with all of us. You can also make sure that you can stay up to date with everything XR for Change related and some of the later topics that Michaela was talking about if you subscribe to the Games for Change newsletter. So make sure you just go to gamesforchange.org to sign up for that. And again, if you're in the New York area, there is still time to check out our exhibit On the Morning You Wake to Nuclear Threat, Exploring Social Impact Through Virtual Reality. It is open at Museum of the Moving Image until February 12th. Link is in the chat directly to get tickets for screening information there. So on behalf of Games for Change and our outstanding partner in MoMI, Museum of the Moving Image, thank you for coming, and I hope you all have a beautiful weekend.